Hi, I'm Carolyn. I've been asked just to talk a little bit about mindfulness, compassion for parents who've got young people starting college or returning to college. I'll speak a bit more about this in a minute, but just to say a little bit about myself. I was a child and adolescent psychiatrist until about 2 years ago when I retired. Since then, I've been teaching mindfulness. Particularly the 8-week mindfulness-based living course, the mindfulness-based living course for young adults, and more recently trained in the compassion-based living course. I'm also a yoga teacher. I completed my master's in mindfulness studies last year, and it's particularly relevant maybe to today and what I'm talking about, in that the research was around supporting children with anxiety and their parents using mindfulness. And I guess thinking about returning to college, anxiety, worries are often going to be quite a large feature. I also wanted to mention about Maya Jersey. So Maya Jersey is Mindfulness and Yoga for All, which is an association that I and other yoga and mindfulness teachers set up. With the purpose of providing mindfulness and yoga to people who wouldn't normally access them. We are a young organisation and things have maybe halted a little bit during the current crisis, but hopefully you'll hear more about us in the future. So why is this talk particularly relevant? I am going to share some slides with you to give you some variety. The slides will also have a variety of using pictures, poems, different ways of maybe representing what we're talking about, which maybe can be helpful to people who maybe have different learning styles. And often within mindfulness, we really want to get in touch with maybe the right side of the brain, and moving away from the analytical thinking part of the brain. So, as I said, we'll be talking about responding mindfully and with compassion for parents, young people returning or starting college. And this is always maybe a stressful, anxiety-provoking time for some young people. But currently at this time, it is more so when it's a time of increased stress due to the COVID-19, so that many of the population are feeling stress, uncertainty about what's going to happen, what it means. When there's been a long period after school or college, so that connection with peers, with tutors, teachers, maybe it's been lost to some extent. Also that process of learning. When there's been less face-to-face preparation for the move, education often prepares young people for changes in years and changes of education facilities, and yet it's not been so possible this year. So there won't have been the visits as there would have been in previous years, which again provides more uncertainty. But when you think about the family, we young people have been at home with their siblings and their parents for long periods of time. And this is a time when young people are wanting to be with their friends. Naturally, part of their process of growing up is separating from parents and engaging with peers. And therefore, this can be a really stressful time when there's that enforced containment within the family home. Also, parents often will have additional stresses, worries related to work, finances, relationships, so that within the home, you as parents may be feeling particularly stressed at a time that young people will also be stressed. And sometimes the worries that you might have will be less apparent to your children, which can make it even more difficult. And also when young people, social relationships or ways of relating have been disrupted, not being able to meet up, not having that physical connection that they often crave with their friends. They may have had plenty of contact through Facebook and other social media, but sometimes what young people might share may not be that situation. And it might be that they find it harder to share any anxiety or distress. So now's a time really for thinking about how we support these young people in returning to college. one quote that I always like, which is by John and Myla Kabat-Zinn. And John Kabat-Zinn is the person who developed mindfulness-based stress reduction, which was the first of the 8-week secular courses in the West. And they have written quite a long book about mindful parenting. And they say that when our children are suffering, we suffer. When our children aren't hurting, parenting can be difficult enough. Sometimes it feels like we're hanging by a thread. I think this is often the case for us. Earlier I talked about my qualifications and training in maybe giving this talk. I guess the other thing that particularly qualifies me is being a parent myself. And a lot of what I say is very relevant, although my son is now grown up and has left home. So maybe think about mindfulness first before we actually go on to think about how that might be of relevance in caring for young people. So this here is saying, who am I? And when you think about it, what we know of ourselves, what we know of the world, is through our thoughts, our bodily sensations, our senses, our touch, our smell, what we see, hear and taste, and our emotions and moods, our feelings. And really there's nothing else that we know of ourselves and others besides this. And this governs what we say and what we do. And we often give high priorities to thoughts. So that we often live in our heads. We're often not aware of our body sensations as much. We are aware of our feelings and even sensory stimulations that we have, we're not always particularly aware of. Our bodies can hold so much information too. So with emotions, we often hold emotions in our bodies. And I don't know if you've ever had that sense of when there's been something you're worried about and you get some relief from that, but you also get that sense in the body going, ah. Or maybe the opposite of when actually your body's feeling tense. You might have a warm bath or massage or do some yoga and stretch, and then emotionally actually feeling that relief too. So we know the body is really connected with our thoughts, with our feelings, but we often aren't particularly aware of that. And that stops us from getting a lot of very useful information about what's happening. So mindfulness. What is mindfulness? One definition, which is by Rob Nairn, is we know what is happening, why it's happening without preference. And within this talk, we're not going to go into great depths about mindfulness. To really learn and find out about mindfulness, it's useful doing an 8-week course or longer term practices. But maybe it's just interesting and useful just to think about technique and attitude within mindfulness. So today we're talking more about maybe informal practices, not sitting, meditating formally, but informal practices that can help us in managing from day to day. And when we practice mindfulness, we often say there's technique and there's also the attitude that we bring to it. So the technique is paying attention to the present moment experience. So go back to that previous slide, our thoughts, our emotions, sensory experience, and physical sensations. So it's just being aware at this moment in time, what's going on in our minds, our feelings, our sensory experience, our physical sensations, but not getting carried away with thinking. So often we spend a lot of time in sort of daydreaming, in getting carried away with thoughts, not being really aware of what's going on around us. It's also almost an automatic pilot. But with mindfulness, when we recognize that we've been carried away from our thinking, we return our attention to the present moment each time the mind wanders off. That's really important because a lot of people think mindfulness is about clearing the mind, getting rid of thoughts, but it's not, it's being with the thoughts. And the more you notice your mind's wandering, the more mindful you're being, and the more you keep bringing your attention back, the more we're training that muscle of attention, that muscle of mindfulness. I'll keep coming back to the present. Sometimes people say they can't do mindfulness or it's not been a good practice because their mind's wandering so much, but that's part of it. And it's that bit, the last bit, allowing experience to be just as it is. So sometimes we take a breath, we come to the present, we might find sense relaxation that feels really nice, and other times our mind's just jumping all over the place. And it's just allowing that experience. And one of the things about mindfulness is the more we practice, the more we get insight into how we are, into maybe what underlies some of our behaviours, some of our attitudes. And it's just by allowing things to be, these things bubble up. And then attitude. So we talk about beginners don't know mind. So it's coming into the present experience. It's a beginner. And I love this quote from Suki. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the experts, there are few. And again, when we think about how we manage and work with our children and be with our children, if we go in thinking we know the answers, we're not able to really think about the wider picture, all the possible solutions that there might be. And that attitude of open, patient, curious researcher's mind. What does it feel like? What is it like at the moment? And a really important one is that being kind to ourselves. We'll talk a bit more about that later, about that real sort of compassion. If we go into mindfulness, becoming more aware of our thoughts and feelings, we can become very critical. So it's important we have that warmth, that kindness to ourselves. And by being kind to ourselves, we can be often kinder to people around us, including our young people. So one of the practices that we often talk about is some mindful pause in daily life. We can have triggers. So sometimes just in practicing, it's quite useful to just take a pause. Might be when you pick up the phone, you're turning on the computer, switching on the kettle, going up the stairs. Sometimes I suggest putting stickers on. So it just reminds you just to take that pause. And it can be really helpful, just bringing you to the present, bringing you to this moment. And in practicing that in daily life, just generally, it can also help us when we have times of difficulty. So we take this pause and we use this trigger. We can take a few conscious breaths, bring our attention to how we're sitting, standing, lying, walking, really feeling our feet on the ground, tune into sensations in the body, bring awareness to the body, the movement of the body. And we call that embodiment, that sense of real grounding. And lots of people find that really helpful in bringing them to the present. And in doing that, becoming grounding, grounds the emotions, it grounds the thoughts that are running away from us. We can also be aware of what we see, hear, taste, smell, touch, the 5 senses, and practicing with a half smile, not just relaxing the face. We know it takes a lot more muscles to frown than it does to smile. And maybe just stopping for a minute, and maybe just taking a mindful pause at the moment. So just coming to sit, maybe looking down, might even just want to close your eyes. Just take the breath, just being aware of the breath as it comes and goes. And you're breathing, really just feeling the weight of your body, maybe on the chair if you're sitting, the feet on the floor, standing, really feeling the ground holding the body. Body is really supported. Just noticing what sensations are there. You're not wanting to change it, just being aware. How does the body feel at this moment? If you're moving, just noticing the movement of the body. Just breathing, maybe just letting a smile touch your lips. If you find your mind wandering, which it will do naturally, just gently coming back to the breath and body. And just noticing how you feel. And then maybe just opening your eyes. And maybe just noticing whether maybe it just gave you a sense of grounding, relaxation, or whether you're starting to feel agitated. But knowing it's okay, it's a way of us finding out more about ourselves. So, distraction. Again, thinking about why is mindfulness going to be helpful for us? Why is this coming to the present? And we tend to mental time travel. So though our breath, our body stay in the present, our minds are always going into the past, the future, or turn to present. So we often go in the past, we're reliving old feelings, playing old memories, ruminating. And that's lovely for a bit if it's nice memories. But either we have nice memories and we're going there because we're finding the present so difficult, and we relive in the past and avoid what's going on, make it even more difficult. And we often play memories and ruminate things that have gone wrong. It's almost like we think, if we think about it enough times, somehow it will be different. And when we talk about acceptance, people sometimes think we mean you have to put up with things, but acceptance is more about it's happened, you can't change it. How you feel about it in this moment, we can't change, although we can do things about it into the future. So we often go back, we ruminate, and again, maybe with our young people, when things are happening, when they're going to college, we might be going back, thinking over and over again about all the things that happened before. And that already gets us into a state, maybe agitation, worry, anger, before things that actually happen in the future, in the present. But we also go into the future, and I guess this is something I often do with planning. So my way of dealing with things that may be quite difficult is just over planning. And again, it's important to plan. It's important to anticipate, but we tend to overdo it sometimes as a way of trying to control. And that again can be really difficult for us, and that worrying. And our worries tend to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So we start with small worry. So we might be worried about, how's our young person going to cope today? And before we know it, we've enlarged it to this point that we think if they don't do well today, the whole life's going to be ruined. Our thoughts just keep escalating. And we know that our minds have evolved and developed to focus on the negative because that keeps us safe. If there's a tiger in the grass and we think it's maybe just a cat, we're done for. If we think there's a tiger and it's a cat, we're okay. So we've been evolved, we naturally tend to overreact. And we can live in the alternative present, daydreaming. It's a good distraction, a way of avoiding what's going on around us. So these are all things that can happen while we're trying to support our young people. Our times of stress, we can be worrying about things in the past, the future, we can be daydreaming, we can be avoiding what's happening here and now, both in maybe difficulties, but also missing out all the pleasant stuff, missing out maybe on our relationship with our young people as well, because we're so much in the past or the future. So this is a poem called Breathe. I rather like it, I rather like it because it was written by a long-term prisoner in Dumfries prison. We only know him as Alistair. But it really talks about how we can use breath. And to me, it feels like if you're in that sort of situation and have experienced this and find that breath is really useful, that breathing, then maybe it can help all of us. So the poem is called Breathe. Stress hooks its claws into the brain, creating false truths and unreal realities, to confuse, to assault, to breaking point. There's no refuge in the past or future. The only answer, breathe. When thoughts spiral out of control like a jet plane on a fatal collision course, there's no respite and no saving grace. When even sleep becomes a banned destination, look to the place of salvation. Breathe. Anxiety can build and surge in a flood, overwhelming rational ideas and calm. Depression throws its hooks into the mind and drags thoughts into the mud. The perfect antidote, breathe. Focus not on the unchangeable past or the unknown mist of the future, but on the now, the moment, your breath. Let it bring the calm that's desperately needed. The final answer, breathe. And I think this is something that we can all learn from. So before we talk a bit more, I thought it would be useful to do just some breath awareness, because we often talk about bringing our awareness to the breath, but it's just useful maybe just trying that. So again, if you want to just come and sit, maybe with the eyes looking down or with the eyes shut, and then just bring your awareness to the belly. When we're relaxed, our bellies come out as we breathe in, and drop it in as we breathe out. When we tense, sometimes we find the breath goes the other direction, and that's okay because it will come. Maybe even putting your hands on your belly and just being aware of the movement of the belly with the breath. And then just bring your attention to the chest. Be aware of the ribs expanding and the sternum lifting as you breathe in and contracting as you breathe out. Bring your attention to your shoulders, noticing that they might just lift slightly as you breathe in and drop as you breathe out. And then just becoming aware of the cool air as it goes down the throat and the warm air as it leaves. And just extending that awareness to the nose, again feeling the cool air as it comes in the nose and the warm air as it leaves. And then just expanding your attention to the whole breath. As you breathe in the cool air, belly rising, chest expanding, maybe shoulders lifting. As the warm air leaves, the belly and the chest contracting, the shoulders dropping. Just inviting the breath in and letting it go. No need to control it. Our bodies can breathe just naturally on their own. And then just maybe bring your awareness particularly to the out breath. Maybe noticing as you breathe out, it might be just a slight sense of relaxation in the body, almost as your awareness is dropping from the head into the body. Maybe becoming more aware of the body being held by the chair and the ground. And then just opening your eyes or looking up. And just being aware. So when people say bring your attention to your breath, maybe it could be any part of the breath, or it could be the whole breath. Sometimes by bringing the awareness just to the breath at the tip of the nose, it can give us more focus, or the whole breath just lets us open up and relax. So why might this be helpful in parenting? One of the models that I find quite useful is by Mr. McCurry. And he talks initially about ABC charts, and you may be aware of them, especially with younger children, but this is slightly different. And then he talks about the dance of anxiety. It could be the dance of worry, fear, or anger. So he'll talk about activators. So a challenging situation for a young person, the behaviour. How does a young person express this? Worry, or fear, or anxiety. It could be through their words, behaviour. They may become angry, they might withdraw. All our children are different and will respond in different ways, even if the underlying concerns are the same. But when we think about consequences in this, we're thinking about the parental response. So as a parent, how do you think and feel? And often you'll have maybe sense of anxiety, frustration, anger, discouragement. And this is often related to our own life experiences and relationships. We're not always aware of it. So it may trigger off a reaction that actually is about what we've experienced with our parents, partners, friends, other people. And we get caught up then in a dance. So as a parent, we might respond to the young person to try and end that challenging situation. We might get in and tell them to stop what's happening. We might give in because we want to make them feel better. And we then enter into this dance of habitual patterns, not often even aware of it. We just react in a particular way. A young person reacts in their way of reacting. And we get into all these interactions based on our previous experiences and beliefs. And somehow, again, we think by responding the same way, we're going to get a different response. That's not often the case. I've got a couple of examples here. So one, night before going to college, John realises he's not completed his work. He gets angry, he storms around the house, blames his parents, states he's not going to college. Jim, his father, feels angry, frustrated. He's reminded John several times to do the work. But he's fearful, underneath this, fearful for John, that John would fail, he'd be unemployed all his life, just like Jim's brother. So Jim shouts at John. John slams his door, refuses to talk. Jim becomes angrier, bangs on John's door. John throws his college work in the bin. And they're both thinking, this always happens. Why does he always do this? Another situation, Alice told to get things ready for college next day. She becomes anxious, shaking, crying, so she doesn't want to go in. She talks about worried about COVID, no one will talk to her. Mary, her mum, feels anxious and panicky, doesn't know. It's not like it when Alex is upset. It reminds Mary of her own difficulties when she was a child, and she wants to protect Alice and make her happy. But Peter, father, feels angry, and he's thinking, here we go again. She needs to toughen up, just like I had to. So Mary enters that dance by confronting Alice, tells her she need not go into college. But Pete comes in, tells her she'll have to go in, and he'll take her. And then, of course, Mary and Pete get caught up in the dance together and argue. And Mary becomes increasingly distressed, and they all get caught up in this dance. And they're thinking, this always happens. Why does he, she, they always do it? And the mindfulness can really help us in recognizing, just by taking that break, that pause, it can help us recognize when we're getting caught up in this dance. And when we recognize it, when we pause, it means we can make more conscious choices about our responses. A poem that I think is quite helpful in thinking about how we respond is called Autobiography in 5 short chapters. So chapter 1, I walk down the street, there's a deep hole in the sidewalk, I fall in, I'm lost, I'm helpless, it isn't my fault, it takes me forever to find a way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street, there's a deep hole in the sidewalk, I pretend I don't see it, I fall in again, I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault. Still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it's there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk round it. Chapter 4, I walk down another street. To me, it feels like we use mindfulness to become more aware of that. So right from the beginning, we start becoming aware of that hole and being able to move very quickly to chapter 5. So I said we mentioned self-compassion. So compassion is defined by the Dalai Lama as being sensitive to the suffering of self and others, with a deep commitment to try to prevent and relieve it. And it's really important, those two parts, because if we are sensitive to the suffering, but feel we're unable to act, we can suffer deeply. Or if we try and act to relieve somebody's suffering, but we don't understand it, we can again cause more distress and difficulty. I like what Tara Brach states about the 2 parts of genuine acceptance. Seeing clearly, and that's mindfulness. So that's really our mindfulness that gives us insight, and hold our experience with compassion. And she says these are as interdependent as the 2 wings of a great bird. Together enable us to fly and be free. That importance of having the mindfulness, the insight. So before it's that stopping, becoming aware what's going on, maybe starting to become aware what's underlying our thoughts and behaviours, but also holding it with compassion. And that word again, that acceptance of accepting what's happened, accepting how we feel. But we can also think about how we might do things differently. So this is another model, moving from red to green, which Rick Hanson talks a lot about. And very much from an evolutionary point of view, he would say that we're really made to be in a responsive mood, to be at what he calls at home. We're naturally at home. And when we're at home, we're being, we're aware, we can reflect and we can act if needed. Whereas in the really reactive mode, we have to leave home to cope with urgent needs. When it's a doing mode, we automatic action with no reflection. And it's important. Again, if a bus is coming towards us or our child, we need to act. We don't need to reflect and look at the speed of the bus and what's going to happen. We have to act. The difficulty in modern life is we often get stuck in the red mode, in the reactive mode. And what we know from research is thinking about experiences, thinking about things that can go wrong, we get the same reaction in our minds and bodies as if it actually happens. And in modern living, we tend not to have the worries of being a tiger that's going to attack us, the things that maybe when our brains evolved would happen and we'd respond, and then we could go back to being peaceful, happy and loving. So he would talk about our threat system, which is that really basic lizard brain, the really ancient part of the brain, which is there to avoid threats, to keep us alive, to allow us to reproduce and have children. And that bit's about our fight, our run, our freeze. We feel worry, anxiety, we fear. And that's about sticks, predators, natural hazards, social aggression and pain. But for our young people, for us, it can be meeting new people, going into a new situation. And we get that threat avoid system that kicks in the anxiety, the worry, and we might flee, fight. And actually, we need to think about how to become peaceful. We have that drive approach system, the mammal brain, which is there about connection, about our memories, about being able to look after our young, about being able to cooperate. But when we can't get things, we then get really clingy. We feel greed, frustration, disappointment. And in modern life, we often see that. So we have a phone, it's a year old, and the next come out. And again, we get that sense of not getting what we need, or we don't get what we feel we need from friends. We see what on social media, or on films, relationships should be like. And we have that real sense of not being contented, being really sort of disappointed, frustrated. And then we have that touch system, the human brain. So the human brain does all our logical thinking. It's what can allow us to go in the past and the future, which we, as far as we know, other animals can't do. But the other thing it does is give us a real sense of I. Again, we don't think other animals have a sense of who I am. And it's that sense of connection. But if we don't feel connected, we can become clingy, we seek approval, we have feelings of loneliness, and jealousy. So how do we deal with this? How do we come to the green? So Rick Hanson will say how to be at home. To be at home, we need to pet the lizard, to be at peace. And I think having these images can be really helpful, soothe and calm the mind. So it could be breath awareness that we've talked about, grounding. Body scans can be helpful, which we're not doing. And this thing called a 3-stage breathing space, which again is a practice that you can do at any time. It's useful to practice it when you're calm, but it can then be useful at times of difficulty. And it can be done in 3 seconds, 3 minutes, or 3 hours. So it helps us move from automatic pilot, connect with the present moment. And we have the open awareness, we gather, and then we expand. So this age, awareness, gathering, expanding. So I'll just take us through it. So again, if you just want to sit, it's useful doing it with the eyes open, but maybe with a soft gaze, because it's practice in daily life. And we wouldn't normally go around with our eyes shut. Initially, just awareness. So just coming to notice how the body feels, not wanting to change it, just being curious. How's the body at this moment? And how are our emotions, our moods? What moods, emotions are there? Is it one strong one or several? What thoughts are going through our minds? Not getting caught up in thinking, but maybe just being aware whether we're in the past or the future. So it's like just doing a weather check of how we are at this moment in time. And then moving to the second stage. So we're just really bringing our focus to the present moment. So just bringing the whole attention to the breath. Using the breath to anchor us to the present. Not changing the present breath, we're just leaving it as it is. But just bringing our full attention to it. And if our mind wanders, just going back to the breath. And then we're just going to expand. So just becoming aware of the breath within the body. And then the whole body. Be aware of the body being held by the ground. And then the space around the body. Be aware of what you can hear. Your eyes open, shapes, colours. And then just being ready to move on with your life. Just opening the eyes. And just see how we can just use that, just with things, we get those things that could be really carried away, we're getting a bit lost, we can just bring that to bring us back to the present. So to be at home again, thinking about the mammal brain, feeding the mouse to be happy. So taking a sense of appreciation of what we have, feeling fed. So we can really have a sense of appreciation. So we know, because the brain has this way of having being focused on the negative, that sometimes we just have to help by bringing some sense of some of the positives. But that's not about positive thinking, the sense of thinking something's going to be that's not, but it's just appreciating and having gratitude for what's around. So just if there's something that's happening, we're enjoying it, we can stop, really fully experience what's happening and absorb it. Maybe the sun on the skin, being aware of the smells, how it feels in the skin, how it feels in the body, the eyes being aware of the light. Just being with it for 20 seconds or so, just letting it really absorb into the body. We can use gratitude practices when we wake up, just think of 3 things that we're grateful for. Or when you go to bed, think of 3 things in the day that you're grateful for. Often we always focus on the things that don't go well. We go into, say, 10 shops, 9 people are really friendly and helpful, 1's not. And we tend to focus on the person that's not. And this thing called a safe place practice, which we won't have time today to talk about. And this appreciation, so walking mindfully is gratitude. Thich Nhat Hanh often talks about gratitude, living in the present moment. He's a monk from Vietnam in his 90s. And he talks about walking mindfully. Our true home is the present moment. To live in the present moment is a miracle. When I breathe in and become fully alive, I see myself as a miracle. When I look at an orange mindfully, see the orange as a miracle. When I peel an orange mindfully, I see that eating an orange is also a miracle. The fact that you are still alive is a miracle. So miracles are the things you perform several times each day with the power of mindfulness. The miracle is not to walk on water. The miracle is to walk on the green earth in the present moment, to appreciate the peace and beauty that are available now. I perform this miracle every time I walk. You too can perform the miracle of walking anytime you want. And actually walking out in nature or even the streets, just appreciating what's around you can be really beneficial. Maybe just connecting with people too. And to be at home, hugging the monkey, feel loved and loving, taking in and getting the sense of caring. And there are practices like memories of kindness, loving kindness, which you can find on the internet. But just thinking of an informal practice, self-compassion break. And here I've called it a mindfulness pause. So maybe at times of difficulty, it's that pausing that we talked about, but then we start acknowledging the difficulty, that this is a moment of suffering. We can give ourselves this comfort, placing your hands over the heart, which I find very helpful, holding your hand, hugging yourself, stroking your face. Depending where you are, you might want to have one that's more subtle. We then think about common humanity, recognising that other people suffer like I am. It's part of being human, I'm not alone. And that's really important because often when we're suffering, we feel like we're the only one. And yet, whatever we're going through, there are other people who have been and are going through the same things. We share the suffering. And then giving ourselves words of kindness. Things like, you're okay, I'm okay, it will pass. May I overcome this? So that's a real part of acknowledging it, giving yourself warmth and caring, that sense of love. And in doing that for yourself, it makes you stronger, more able then to respond to the difficulties of your young person. What we know is that often we have to help to contain the emotions of our young people, maybe just holding them to allow them to move on. But if we're unstable, we can't contain their feelings if we can't contain our own. So by getting that real sense of groundedness, of being present, we can be much more benefit to our young people. So what is a mindfulness and compassionate response? So when your young person's facing a challenge, what can you do? And I would be suggesting that you could come to the present, take some mindful breaths, that real sense of grounding, so really feeling present, getting that real feeling, your body being grounded, your breath there, you're in the present. Become aware of tension within the body, so just really feeling how your body is, recognizing your habitual thoughts and feelings. So if you're coming to the present, you might start recognizing that immediate response, how you'd normally respond, and just being aware of it, not jumping in that red reactive mode, just being responsive, reflecting and pausing. So that real pause that we talked about, that awareness, acknowledging the suffering of your child and yourself, and knowing that you're suffering, knowing your child's suffering. And it's not reacting, not getting caught up in the dance. So you recognise that maybe there is a dance there, and taking time to respond. And again, I've talked about that acceptance, but it's accepting what's happened, what people are feeling. It's not to say things don't change. If we're being hurt and somebody's hurting us, we don't just let it happen, but we just accept that maybe it's painful for us. We can also accept it's painful for them, but we take action. And listening, it's really important, that listening mindfully. And we often don't. We say we're listening, but often, and I know I do this, we've already got the yes button in our head. We already know what we want to say. So it's stopping again, constantly coming back to the body and the breath, really hearing what they've got to say, maybe noticing how your body responds, how your feelings are, how your thoughts are. So really listening and not thinking about how you're going to respond. And then acknowledging, accepting what your child feels, acknowledging, accepting what you're feeling. And then you can reflect and respond with empathy. Now, how you reflect, how you respond will depend on you and your child. You might give some words, you might reflect back to them what you've heard to show you've understood it. You might respond with maybe your own experience, but that often isn't what your young person wants to hear at that moment. It'll be useful at some point, but it's knowing when's the right time. And again, that real connection with your body, that real connection with the present can help you make those decisions. And then you can contain by giving space, containing, but then also giving space, because actually if we can hold our young people, give them just the amount of support they need, they can learn from the situation, they get that growth, that individuation that they need. You'll be aware that I haven't actually said what you should do in those situations, because from a mindfulness perspective, we often feel that we have the answers. If we just stop, we become more aware of our own reactions, we can naturally become more aware of how to respond. You may also say, well, maybe these things are useful for my young person, but what we know is that the young people may respond to mindfulness, may not, but actually if you're going to help them and you're going to suggest it, we know that if they see it in action, they see you doing it, they're much more likely to do it themselves. It's a bit like telling a young person to eat healthily, where you sit there with your burgers and chips and your crisps. We need to be putting into action what we tell them will be helpful for them. And finally, just something called PEACE for difficult situations. So this builds on it. And it's maybe just a useful acronym to remember. So PEACE for pause. When you realise something's hard, so when something's difficult, and you're in your young person in this difficulty, pausing, exhaling, so breathing out, that bit we talked about before, that sense of relaxation, really letting go of the breath. You might want to sigh or groan. And as we do that, it actually just lets some of the tension go, brings the game right into the present. And then the A, so acknowledging. situation as it is. This is a really difficult time. Maybe using, I have at the moment got sunset orange hair. So your young person comes down the night before with their orange sunset hair, acknowledging it as it is, accepting the situation, and also your response. So they come down, it as it is, that's not going to change, and just recognizing your response and allowing those feelings to be there. So, okay, this is how it is at the moment. Accept this is what it's happened. Maybe they're really pleased, maybe they've decided they don't like it, and you're having to deal with their response as well. And the C, choose. How will you respond? So you, again, with clarity, being clear about what it is, what's important, forgetting the bits that aren't important, what's going to be the important response. That clarity too, that actually maybe their hair colour, the fact they haven't done their work, the worries they got, that's not the end of the world. John Kabat-Zinn again often will say, there's more right than there is wrong with us. So it's that clarity, what's important, the courage, actually being courageous about how you're going to respond, what's going to be best in the situation, maybe stepping out your own comfort zone to respond. Compassion, that real sense of compassion, that real sense of empathy for your young person about what they're going through at the moment. And that's not about accepting it and letting them not go to college. It's about just really sensing, being compassionate. This is really a moment of difficulty for them. And comedy. So the person who developed this said comedy is not the right word, but C helps it to be remembered. So it's humour. Humour is so important. And if you can bring humour into it, that often helps the whole situation. And then the E, engage with the situation, engage with your young person, and engaging with life, just moving on. This was a really quick run through, but I hope it might be helpful. And I wish you all the best in moving forward out of this situation with COVID, back into our lives, maybe in new ways. So looking after yourself, looking after young people, and hopefully at times remembering to make taking a mindful pause, taking a breath, grounding. Thank you.